If Scout hadn't stopped in the middle of that empty trail, nobody would have found what was hidden behind the trees. Not that day. Not ever. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, one of those sleepy afternoons where nothing ever happened, until a K9 dog froze like he'd just smelled the end of the world. Ashwood, Oregon, was the kind of town where folks still left their doors unlocked and waved at every passing car. But that Sunday, the local scanner buzzed with something that made Officer Dean Walker's stomach drop. 12-year-old male. Name's Aiden Lee. Last seen heading to a friend's house. Never made it. Missing kids weren't common in Ashwood. Not the kind that vanished without a trace. Especially not ones like Aiden, quiet, gentle, a straight-A student who loved his dog and spent most weekends gaming on his tablet. The trail that ran behind the Lee family home led straight into Pine Hollow Forest, a place kids hiked in the summer but rarely wandered alone. It had been closed to the public for a year now due to unstable terrain, but the old wire fence was barely waist-high and easy to ignore. Scout, Dean's German Shepherd partner of 5 years, leapt from the cruiser the moment the door clicked. No leash. No hesitation. Just instinct. "Go find him, boy," Dean said softly. They hadn't walked 5 minutes when Scout came to a dead stop on the edge of a dried-up creek bed. The K9's ears went stiff. He lowered his head and sniffed hard at the dirt like something was off, something wrong. Then came the bark. Not the alert bark. Not the usual, "Hey, I found something," bark. This was a warning. A gut-deep, throat-ripping snarl of danger. Dean reached instinctively for his sidearm. "What is it, Scout?" The K9 didn't move. Just kept growling at the brush, refusing to blink. That's when Dean saw it, a thin strip of fabric, stuck on a jagged branch. Navy blue with a neon green outline. At first glance, it looked like a wristband. But when Dean picked it up with his gloves, he realized it had a printed image. It wasn't from any sports team or brand he recognized. It was pixelated, 8-bit styled. Like something from an old video game. He placed it in an evidence bag, marking the GPS location. "This yours, Aiden?" he murmured. Scout circled the area twice, nose low to the ground, before charging east, deeper into the woods. Dean followed, boots crunching dead leaves, eyes darting between tree trunks. No trails. No signs. Just forest. Thick and wrongfully quiet. Another 15 minutes passed before Scout slowed. His posture shifted, focused, but calmer. Dean caught up just as the dog reached a worn patch of ground that looked like it had been recently disturbed. A few feet ahead was an old service road, overgrown but still drivable for a small vehicle. It wasn't on any updated map. Dean hadn't seen it before. At the far end, partially hidden by brush and branches, was something even stranger, a trail of energy drink cans, same brand Aiden had been seen buying 2 days ago. Scout nudged one with his nose and let out a soft whine. Dean looked down the path. It bent around the hill and vanished into the trees. By the time they returned to the cruiser, the sun was starting to drop behind the ridge. Dean briefed the chief, filed the report, and handed off the wristband for testing. Most of the team was ready to call it an ordinary missing person case. But Dean wasn't buying it. Neither was Scout. Back at the station, the German Shepherd sat staring at the exit door, refusing to eat or rest. Every time someone moved near the woods on the station map, his ears would twitch. Dean leaned back in his chair, staring at the photo of Aiden taped to the whiteboard. It wasn't just the torn wristband or the strange road. It was something deeper. Something about this didn't feel like a boy who got lost. That night, Dean reviewed security footage from a gas station half a mile from the trailhead. Aiden had been there 2 days earlier, buying chips and 2 cans of Ash Fuel energy drink. He wasn't alone. A figure stood in the background, hood pulled low, face blurred by the camera's angle. But his posture was strange. He didn't move. Just stood there, watching. Dean paused the video. Scout, lying beside him, let out a low growl. Yeah, Dean muttered. I don't like him either. By morning, the whole town knew about Aiden. Flyers were printed, volunteers organized search groups. News trucks rolled into Ashwood like vultures sensing a storm. But while everyone searched the marked trails, Scout pulled Dean back toward that service road. They followed it. 2 miles in, they found something nobody expected. A hunting cabin. Hidden by trees. Boarded up. No power lines. And freshly used. The cabin shouldn't have been there. Not on any forestry maps. Not in the ranger records. Not even in old Google satellite imagery. But there it stood, buried beneath pine overgrowth, its roof sagging slightly, with thick ivy curling up the wooden siding like it had been growing for decades. Only it hadn't. Officer Dean Walker stood a few feet back, hand resting lightly on his sidearm. Scout was crouched low at his side, nose twitching, tail frozen mid-air. Not a bark. Not a whine. Just full-on predator focus. Dean whispered, "You sure about this, Scout?" The German shepherd answered by creeping forward, placing one paw carefully in front of the other, straight toward the busted front porch. The door had no lock, just a wooden plank nailed haphazardly across it. Dean pried it loose with a crowbar and pushed the door open. The air that hit him was musty, but not stale. Not like it had been abandoned for years. No, this was different. This place had been used. Recently. Inside, dust floated in thin beams of morning light cutting through cracks in the roof. A warped sofa sat in one corner. A broken mini-fridge hummed low in the back like it hadn't given up just yet. But what really caught Dean's eye, what made his skin crawl, was the setup near the wall. A tangle of wires. Game controllers. GoPro mounts screwed into the ceiling. Scout padded over and sniffed a corner. Then he stiffened, let out a deep bark, and began scratching at a half-covered drawer beneath a pile of dirty clothes. Dean knelt beside him and tugged it open. Inside were 3 things. A hoodie, size youth large. A broken smartwatch with a cracked black screen. A small stack of memory cards wrapped in rubber bands. Back at the station, Dean sat alone in the A/V room staring at the monitor. Scout was curled at his feet, but wide awake, ears still alert. The footage on the first memory card loaded like a movie. Grainy. Handheld. No timestamps. The video opened in the same cabin, but the furniture was gone. In its place were 4 boys, all blindfolded, standing in a square of tape marked on the wooden floor. A man's voice crackled from a small speaker overhead. "Welcome to round 2, it said. No talking. No crying. Or you go back to level 1. One kid flinched. Another shook his head, lips trembling. The camera zoomed in but always cut off their faces. Dean leaned forward. What the hell is this? The boys were made to crawl on the floor, navigate a maze made from overturned chairs and ropes. One tripped and cried out, but was immediately zapped by something under his hoodie. Dean hit pause. Under each kid's shirt was a collar, not a normal GPS tracker. This was homemade. Wired. Maybe electric. Scout whined low. Dean stared at the freeze frame, how close the kids looked to Aiden's size. Maybe one of them was Aiden. But the footage was deliberately altered, grainy, edited, and cropped to avoid identifying details. It felt like watching something illegal. Something dark. Something real. Any luck with the hoodie? Dean asked later that afternoon, dropping the sweatshirt on evidence tech's desk. Mallory, the tech, shook her head. No tags. Cheap print. Could be from anywhere. But the logo. She pointed to the faded chest emblem. It was a pixelated wolf head, same style as the wristband Scout had found the day before. Dean took out the wristband and laid it beside the hoodie. A perfect match in color, shape, and design. Mallory tapped her screen. I searched Ashplay and variations. Came up dry on Google, but when I ran it through archived web data, bingo. She pulled up a screen that looked like an old internet forum. Survivor Kids, underground challenges, VR-based missions. But here's the thing, it's not a public game. It's invite-only. Most of the threads are encrypted or gone. But the usernames, they all use the same naming format. Dean leaned in. Which is? Coach_01. Coach_11. Coach_7X. Later that evening, Dean sat in his cruiser at the edge of Pine Hollow Forest, windows down, fingers tapping the steering wheel. Scout sat beside him, tail thumping against the seat every few minutes, restless. Dean stared down the old service road. His instincts told him the cabin was just the beginning. He keyed the mic, dispatch, this is 1 to 7. I'm gonna run a loop back toward the hollow. Copy? Copy that, 1 to 7. Stay safe out there. They reached the site just before sunset. Scout jumped out first again, eager, nose to the ground, tail stiff with purpose. But instead of heading back toward the cabin, he darted into the tree line behind it. Scout, heel. Dean called, but the dog didn't slow. Dean followed, careful to avoid roots and uneven ground. After about 200 yards, Scout stopped. Before them stood an old ranger's outpost, or what used to be one. Its roof had caved in and graffiti covered every wall. Scout sniffed near a busted generator, then let out a soft bark. That's when Dean saw it, beneath the outpost's floorboards, a faint blue glow. He pulled up a broken plank. Inside the crawlspace was a laptop, half buried in dirt, its screen cracked but still glowing. On it, a paused live stream with the words, Round 4 loading. Dean's radio crackled, but he didn't respond. Scout whined and scratched at the dirt, revealing wires leading to a power bank and a portable router. Dean grabbed his phone, snapped photos of everything. But what shook him wasn't the laptop. It was the faint sound coming from the wireless speaker beside it. A child's voice. Please. I don't want to play anymore. Scout didn't hesitate. His claws dug into the gravel road as he lunged forward, nose down, tail straight. Officer Dean Walker followed close behind, flashlight slicing through the dim morning fog. The warehouse loomed ahead, gray, long abandoned, and marked with graffiti like, Get Out, and Game Over. Dean had seen plenty of decaying buildings in his time, but this one gave him a different kind of chill. It wasn't just the silence. It was the faint scent of something artificial, plastic, sweat, and fear. The kind of place teenagers dared each other to explore, but never twice. Scout sniffed at the rusted-out door and let out a low, guttural growl. Dean didn't wait. He unholstered his weapon and pushed the door open slowly. Creak. The metal groaned like it hadn't moved in years, but inside, the dust was disturbed. Trash littered the concrete, snack wrappers, old gaming magazines, a smashed Red Bull can. More telling was the VR headset, cracked in half, tossed beside an empty duffel bag. And something else, on the wall, someone had spray-painted a phrase in glitchy, distorted font. Ashplay, survive or shut down. Dean's throat tightened. Scout, search. The German shepherd began sweeping the room, tail swishing with purpose. Within seconds, he zeroed in on a heavy crate shoved against the far wall. He pawed at the edge, barking 3 sharp times. Dean stepped over debris and knelt. You smell something? Scout barked again, more urgently now, and scratched the concrete floor just beneath the crate. Dean moved fast. With both hands, he yanked the crate aside. Beneath it was a metal trapdoor, nearly invisible to the eye. No lock, just a recessed grip in the middle. "Good boy," Dean whispered. He pulled it open. A narrow staircase led down into complete darkness. They descended slowly. Each step echoed like thunder in the dead silence. Scout took the lead, ears alert. The smell intensified: sweat, rubber, electronics. Dean's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a basement lined with mounted cameras, unplugged but still intact. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines. On one wall hung a corkboard filled with printed photographs, faces blurred out with black marker. Children, maybe teenagers. Some standing in the woods, some blindfolded, all wearing matching neon wristbands. In the corner sat a dirty mattress with a ripped-up comforter and a child-sized hoodie folded neatly on top. Dean picked it up with gloved hands. Aiden Lee. Size small. Scout let out a low whine. Dean's jaw clenched. He was here. But something didn't add up. Why leave the hoodie behind, folded so carefully? Why erase the faces but keep the photos? The deeper Dean looked, the more surreal it became. There were LED ring lights, handheld gimbals, and 3 high-end camera drones stored in a case labeled Ashwood Media Team. And then, Scout's ears perked. He turned toward a second door in the back corner. Unlike the first, this one was padlocked shut, thick chain running through the handle. Scout approached slowly, nose twitching. Then, all at once, he lunged and slammed his paw against the door, barking like a madman. Dean's adrenaline spiked. "What is it, Scout?" The German shepherd's bark became frantic, his body pressed against the door as if something was right on the other side. Dean kicked the door. "Anybody in there?" "This is the police." Silence. Then, a shuffle. Faint. Human. Dean turned back to head topside. "We're getting a team down here now." Back at the station, Dean brought in Detective Laura Crane from the county's cybercrime unit. She had a no-nonsense attitude, short-cropped blonde hair, and a coffee addiction worse than anyone on the force. "You said you found memory cards at the cabin?" she asked, flipping through the evidence log. "Yeah." Scout uncovered a few. "Techs are decrypting them now." "And this warehouse, same scent trail?" Dean nodded. Scout matched it. Crane pulled out a laptop and opened a folder labeled Ashplay Evidence. On screen was a screenshot from one of the GoPro files found at the cabin. It showed a teenager in a blindfold being made to crawl through mud, surrounded by glow sticks. The only sound in the clip was the rhythmic chant of a digitized voice. "You must complete the round. There is no quitting." Another clip showed a digital scoreboard projected onto a tree trunk, 2 names displayed, but only one marked as eliminated. Crane zoomed in on the screen. "You see that?" she said, pointing to a watermark in the bottom corner. "Someone tried to scrub it, but not well. It's the same server mark used by 3 dark web game forums we've been tracking for months." Dean leaned in. "So this isn't some local sicko?" Crane shook her head. "No. It's a full-on operation. And Ashwood might just be their filming site." Later that night, Dean couldn't sleep. He sat in his cruiser just outside the Lee house, lights off, engine running. The porch light was still on. Aiden's mom hadn't turned it off since he disappeared. Scout lay beside him, restless. Every time a twig cracked or a leaf blew across the road, his head snapped up. Dean looked down at the hoodie again, now tagged and bagged. "We're not giving up on him," he whispered. Scout licked his hand. Then, without warning, Scout stood up. Stiff. Focused. He pressed his nose to the window. Dean followed his gaze. A white van rolled slowly down the street, no plates, windows tinted too dark for legal limits. Dean started the engine. Scout began to growl. By now, Officer Dean Walker had learned one thing: when Scout growled low and didn't stop, something awful was nearby. They were standing outside an old concrete pump station near the Ashwood River, a decaying shell of a building that hadn't been in use since the 90s. Scout's nose was pressed to the rusted double doors, his body tense, tail stiff, ears sharp like radar. Inside, it smelled of mildew, metal, and something else, burned plastic. Dean held his breath as he pried open the door, flashlight raised in one hand, service pistol in the other. Scout slipped in first, every step silent. The room was dark. Quiet. Too quiet. Then a sound, a soft electronic hum. They found it in the back room, what used to be a mechanical office. A dusty generator buzzed in the corner, powering a rack of old servers and a still-warm laptop. Everything looked jerry-rigged, patched together with electrical tape and plastic zip ties. Scout padded toward a narrow hallway at the back. He stopped suddenly and let out a low, uneasy growl. Dean followed the light from his flashlight and spotted something half-hidden behind a sheet of plywood, a child-sized mattress, stained and sunken in the corner. Nearby were empty water bottles, a cracked tablet, and one worn-out sneaker. "Aiden?" Dean whispered into the silence. No answer. Only the whir of a hard drive spinning. Back at the station, the tech team pulled what they could from the laptop. Much of the data had been wiped clean, but one folder survived, buried under layers of encrypted nonsense. It was labeled Round 5, Raw Feed. Dean watched the footage in silence. At first, it looked like a typical vlog, GoPro footage, shaky, worn by someone running through trees. Then it zoomed in, 5 kids, maybe aged 10 to 14, blindfolded and lined up in the woods, hands zip-tied in front of them. Each wore a digital watch around their wrist. Off-camera, a voice spoke, filtered through distortion software, deep and mechanical. "Welcome to Round 5. Do what I say, and you move forward. Fail, and you're out. This is how champions are made." The camera panned across their faces. They looked terrified. Dean's jaw clenched. He hit pause and rewound, looking again at the voice's timing. The way it spoke. The rhythm. Scripted. Controlled. Deliberate. Whoever this was, he wasn't improvising. He was performing. That night, a small manila envelope was dropped at the police station's front desk with no return address. Inside was a USB flash drive and a handwritten note. "Not all players win. Not all coaches are seen. Keep looking." Dean slid the USB into a secure terminal. More footage. More horror. A different round. This time in a warehouse. Kids were being told to climb pallets stacked 12 feet high and jump without hesitation. The last boy to go hesitated, and the footage abruptly cut off. Another video. A girl was crying, repeating, "I don't want to play anymore," but a buzzer shocked her wristband until she completed her task, crawling through a narrow tunnel lined with barbed chicken wire. Dean stared at the monitor, feeling sick. Scout sat beside him, head resting on Dean's boot, letting out the occasional anxious whine. He turned to his partner. "Let's go find where they're hiding." The next day, while combing through missing persons reports from nearby counties, Dean found a detail he'd missed before. Another boy, Tyler Grant, age 13, had gone missing from Brookdale 2 months prior. Tyler's last online activity showed a click-through from a suspicious link titled, "Level Up IRL, Join Now." Dean checked the Lee family's laptop again. Buried in Aiden's downloads folder? The same browser cookie. Same link. Same ad. Different location. "That's the invite," Dean muttered. "That's how they pick their targets." That afternoon, Scout led Dean to a dry creek bed near Route 34. On the far side was a trail of trampled grass and tire marks that weren't there the week before. 50 yards in, they found a campsite, recently abandoned. Scout sniffed everything: a scorched fire ring, a pile of burned paper, several empty food wrappers, and a muddy, tattered gray sock partially buried in the dirt. Dean bagged it, took a photo, and sent it to forensics. Hours later, the call came in: Aiden's DNA was on the sock. Which means, Dean said aloud, he was here. Maybe just days ago. But where was he now? Dean returned to the warehouse that night. Something had been nagging him, something about the footage. He walked the perimeter until Scout stopped at the southeast corner. There, buried in the weeds, was a plastic casing half covered in dirt. Scout dug at it. A shock collar, the same model seen in the videos. But this one wasn't broken. It had a tracking chip. Dean's heart raced. Scout, you genius. He called dispatch and had the signal traced. It was faint, but active, pinging from a few miles northeast, at the edge of Ashwood County. Right where the old Camp Echo Pines used to be, a youth summer camp that had closed down, for renovations, 5 years ago after mold complaints and a kitchen fire. Dean's blood ran cold. What are the odds, he muttered, that a moldy summer camp just happens to sit at the same GPS spot where a missing kid's tracker just lit up? He looked at Scout. The dog didn't move. Just stared into the darkness ahead, ears up, waiting. They'd return at dawn. But someone else was already watching. From inside the rotting walls of Camp Echo Pines, a red light blinked on, recording. For the first time in days, the GPS signal pinged. It was weak, nearly lost in the digital static, but it was there. A faint heartbeat from the shock collar found earlier at the warehouse. Dean leaned over the dispatcher's desk, staring at the blip moving slowly across the screen. "Where is that?" he asked. "About 7 miles northeast," she said, zooming in. "Old Hawthorne Lake Campground. Been shut down since the wildfires 3 years ago." Dean's heart kicked up. Scout stood beside him, tail still, ears locked forward like he understood every word. "Let's go." The sun was just starting to dip when the cruiser rolled up to the front gate. Weeds had overtaken the parking lot. The once colorful welcome sign now hung sideways, burned at one corner, the words Hawthorne Lake Camp barely legible. As soon as Dean opened the door, Scout bolted from the cruiser and ran ahead. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of wood smoke from long-past fires. The buildings had that eerie, frozen-in-time look: dorms, mess hall, cabins, all empty, quiet, too quiet. Scout led Dean straight to the mess hall, nose low to the cracked concrete. When they reached the back wall, the K9 stopped and began barking sharply, his body tense, front paws scratching at the warped linoleum. Dean tapped the wall. Hollow. He dropped to one knee, brushing away debris. There, a warped air vent cover. Scout's nose dove in, whining softly. Dean shone his flashlight inside. Nothing but darkness. He pushed the cover open and crawled in. The vent led to a storage crawlspace beneath the mess hall. It was hot, stale, and filled with the stench of sweat and mildew. Dean crept forward, and Scout, slinking like a wolf, followed behind him. A few yards in, Dean froze. A rusted, grated metal door stood in the way. Behind it, dim light flickered. He pulled out a bolt cutter and snapped the lock. When the door creaked open, the smell hit him first: unwashed clothes, fear, and something sour, like old meat. Then he saw them. 4 kids, huddled together on a bare mattress. Dirty. Thin. Eyes wide with trauma. One of them, a boy no older than 10, looked up at him and whispered, "Coach said we passed the final round. We survived. So he left." Dean lowered his weapon. "You're safe now," he said softly, motioning Scout forward. The K9 sniffed each child gently, tail wagging low and slow, a living, breathing sign that it was finally over. But it wasn't. Not yet. As Dean radioed for medical, Scout suddenly whipped around and barked viciously toward a boiler on the far side of the room. Dean followed him. Behind the boiler was a narrow passage, almost hidden behind broken shelving. Scout sniffed, barked again, then darted through. Dean followed. The tunnel stretched 30 feet and ended in what looked like a makeshift surveillance hub, a folding table, a tangled mess of wires, and a rack of servers blinking quietly in the darkness. One monitor still streamed video in black and white, footage from a mounted camera back in the kid's cell. Live feed. Someone had been watching, until recently. Dean moved to unplug everything, but Scout growled again, this time at a thin strand of wire stretched across the tunnel exit. Tripwire. Dean ducked just as an alarm exploded overhead, shrill and piercing. Somewhere above them, footsteps thundered, fast and heavy. Dean and Scout sprinted back toward the crawlspace, heart racing. He radioed out. Suspect is still on site. I repeat, suspect is still on site. They emerged just in time to see a figure sprinting from the mess hall's rear exit, tall, male, hoodie over his head, backpack slung tight. Dean gave chase on foot. Scout lunged ahead like a missile. The man tried to hop a broken fence. Scout launched, grabbing hold of his sleeve and yanking him back hard to the ground. Dean caught up seconds later, cuffing the suspect as he screamed. They wanted to play. I didn't force them. They clicked the link. His face was pale, streaked with sweat. He looked like a ghost. But Dean didn't care. You recorded them. You trapped them. I didn't touch them, the man shrieked. I just ran the challenges. It was just for views. Crypto tips. Dean's blood ran cold. This wasn't about ransom or even sadism. This was content. Inside the suspect's backpack were 2 external hard drives, a GoPro, and a printed itinerary labeled, Final Round, Ashwood Kids. Names were listed. Ages. Times. Pre-planned activities. Dean handed the drives to forensics and took the suspect to holding. But something still gnawed at him. Later that night, back at the precinct, he sat across from the rescued children. They were cleaned up now, wrapped in blankets, drinking cocoa. The same boy as before, Eli, spoke quietly, barely above a whisper. There were more cameras than we ever saw, he said. And there were noises, behind the walls. Like someone else was walking. But Coach never left his chair. Dean leaned forward. You think someone else was watching? Eli nodded slowly. I think Coach wasn't the only one filming. Scout sat near the door, still alert. Still listening. Because somewhere out there, behind another screen, another player was watching the game. And maybe, just maybe, he hadn't logged off yet. The man didn't put up much of a fight, not against Scout. He bolted the second officer. Dean kicked open the door to the abandoned farmhouse, ducking out the back like he'd rehearsed it 100 times. But Scout was faster. The German Shepherd sprang from the porch like a missile, closed the distance in seconds, and tackled the suspect hard into the gravel. By the time Dean rounded the corner, the man was on the ground, his jacket torn and face pressed into the dirt, Scout hovering over him with a low, rumbling growl in his throat. Don't move, Dean ordered, gun drawn. Call it in. We've got him. Backup arrived minutes later. The man, identified as Graham North, 42, was cuffed, silent, and twitchy. He looked like any average loner, unshaven, wearing a cheap sports jacket and dirty sneakers. But inside the house, the truth unraveled like a trap door. In one of the back rooms, Dean and the FBI cybercrime team discovered a setup so bizarre it felt like a movie set, wires taped along walls, an old generator humming in the corner, and 3 heavy-duty laptops stacked on crates, still warm. A 4th monitor was looping recorded footage, shaky GoPro scenes from inside the Ash Play survival game. Kids running obstacle courses blindfolded. One boy in tears being told to pass the next test or go back to level 1. Another clip showed the kids locked in that glass cell under the camp, the same kid Scout had helped rescue just hours earlier. Dean stared at the screen, fists clenched. And in the background of every clip, a voice distorted by software. You play. You win. You move on. The coach. Graham North wasn't the mastermind. He was just one of them. Later, back at the station, Scout sat calmly by Dean's desk while the agents combed through hard drives and servers pulled from the farmhouse. The dark web forums they'd traced were like roach nests, scattered, hidden, but all linked. Ashplay wasn't just a game. It was a network. And the players weren't kids. They were victims. North had been recruited online, an administrator for the Oregon sector. He monitored live streams, moved the kids from site to site, reset equipment. And he wasn't the only one. We believe there are at least 4 other active cells across the country, one agent muttered grimly, scanning the files. Dean looked down at Scout, who stared up at him as if he already knew. We're not done, are we? Dean asked softly. Scout's ears twitched. Then he let out a quiet, confident bark. That afternoon, the rescued children were reunited with their families at a secure center in Eugene. The media was already buzzing, camera vans parked outside, reporters clamoring for sound bites. But inside, things were quieter, raw. Dean knelt beside one of the boys, maybe 9 years old, and handed him a cup of hot cocoa. You're safe now, Dean said gently. The boy didn't speak, but looked over at Scout, who was lying nearby. He's the one who found you, Dean added. The boy reached out slowly and stroked the dog's fur. He barked, real loud, the boy whispered. When I thought nobody would. Dean smiled, eyes stinging. That's Scout. He doesn't miss a thing. 2 days later, the mayor of Ashwood stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by law enforcement and local officials. The community had come together to honor the team behind the rescue, especially the 4-legged hero. Scout, wearing a polished K9 vest and a medal around his neck, sat beside Dean as the applause thundered. While evil tried to hide in the shadows, the mayor declared, one dog refused to stop until the truth came out. Let us remember this, evil hides in plain sight, but so does courage. The applause echoed across the square. Dean bent down, whispered, good boy, and kissed Scout on the head. But not everything was wrapped in a bow. That night, as Dean returned home, he passed the case board still set up in his home office. Among the photos was a grainy screenshot pulled from the recovered video feeds, one that hadn't been made public. It showed a camera feed inside the old summer camp. But this one wasn't operated by Graham North. In the lower corner of the frame was a timestamp, live. 2 hours before Scout and Dean arrived. Whoever was behind that camera had been watching. And they had vanished without a trace. Dean sat down in silence. Scout rose from the corner and padded over, resting his chin on Dean's knee. Dean nodded. I know, buddy. We got more work to do. If you made it this far, thank you for following Scout and Officer Dean on this chilling journey. This story was inspired by real-world K9 heroes who use their instincts and training to protect the most vulnerable. Eyes, what would you have done if your child had received a message to join this game? Backhand index pointing down, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Paw prints, and don't forget to subscribe for more true inspired stories of courage, justice, and K9 heroes who never back down.